The notification sound woke me at 4:47 inches the morning. Not my alarm, not a text. It was the little chime from my doorbell camera app, the one my sister had installed 3 weeks earlier after my neighbor's car got broken into. I almost rolled over and went back to sleep. Almost. I sat up in the dark and opened the app on my phone. The thumbnail showed my driveway, my husband's truck, and someone standing next to it who wasn't my husband. I didn't know it yet, but what I was about to watch on that 2-inch screen would unravel 4 years of my life in a single night. My name is Claire, and I was 31 years old when I found out that the man I married was not who I thought he was, not even close. My husband and I had met at a fundraising event for a children's hospital where I worked as a grant coordinator. He walked in wearing a charcoal blazer, holding a glass of sparkling water instead of wine, and told me he didn't drink because he liked to stay sharp. I thought that was admirable. I thought a lot of things about him that turned out to be wrong. We dated for 11 months before he proposed. We married in a small ceremony in my aunt's backyard in Georgia. My older sister, Dana, was my maid of honor. She gave a toast that made half the guests cry. My husband's side of the family flew in from Ohio, his mother, a younger brother named Derek, and a handful of cousins I'd met twice. They were warm enough, polite, but there was always something slightly rehearsed about them, like they'd all agreed beforehand on exactly how much to reveal. I told myself I was imagining things. For the first year, life was genuinely good. We bought a small house in a quiet suburb of Charlotte. I kept my job at the hospital foundation. My husband ran what he described as a commercial real estate consulting firm. He helped businesses find and negotiate lease agreements for office and retail spaces. He worked from home most days, took calls behind closed doors, and traveled to meet clients maybe once or twice a month. The money was good, better than good. Our joint account had a comfortable cushion that I assumed came from his commissions. I never asked to see his books. I trusted him. That was my first mistake, but it wasn't the one that nearly destroyed me. The second year, small things started to shift. He became protective of his laptop in a way he hadn't been before. He started going for late-night drives, he said, helped him clear his head. He began taking calls in the garage. When I asked about a particular client he'd mentioned, he'd give me a different name than he had before, then smooth it over so naturally that I'd wonder if I'd misheard him the first time. Dana noticed before I did. She lived 40 minutes away and came over for dinner most Sundays. One evening in the kitchen, while my husband was outside grilling, she looked at me and said quietly, "Does he seem different to you lately?" I told her he was just stressed about a deal falling through. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. By our third anniversary, I had stopped asking questions. Not because I'd found answers, but because every time I came close to asking something that mattered, something would shift in his expression, not anger. Exactly. More like a door closing behind his eyes. And I'd learned, slowly and without realizing it, to stay on the right side of that door. Dana did not like that I'd learned that. She was the one who suggested the doorbell camera. She drove over one Saturday morning, pulled the box out of her tote bag, and spent 2 hours on a ladder drilling it into the frame above my front door. She linked it to my phone and showed me how to access the footage from anywhere. She said it was about the neighborhood, about safety. She said it casually and didn't make a big deal out of it. But when she hugged me goodbye that day, she held on a second longer than usual. And she said, "Into my hair, you can always come stay with me. You know that, right?" I said I knew. I said everything was fine. 3 weeks later, my phone chimed at 4:47 inches the morning. I watched the footage sitting cross-legged on my side of the bed, the glow of the phone screen the only light in the room. The timestamp in the corner read 4:31 a.m. My husband's truck was in the driveway because he'd said the night before that he had an early meeting and would take it instead of his usual car. Standing next to the truck, half in shadow, was a man I didn't recognize. Medium height, wide shoulders, wearing a dark jacket. He and my husband stood close together, speaking in low voices that the camera's microphone barely picked up. The man handed my husband a manila envelope. My husband opened it, looked inside, and nodded. Then he put the envelope under his arm, got in the truck, and backed out of the driveway. The other man walked to the curb, got into a silver sedan I hadn't noticed, and drove away in the opposite direction. The whole exchange took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I sat there for a long time after the video ended. Then I opened the app's archive, something I hadn't done since Dana set it up. I didn't expect much. 3 weeks of footage, cars going by, the mail carrier, My neighbor's golden retriever escaping again. What I found instead made my hands go cold. The camera had a cloud backup feature that Dana had switched on without mentioning it to me, linked to an account she'd set up in my name. And because the camera had actually been purchased 6 months earlier, Dana had bought it on sale and kept it in a box, meaning to give it to me sooner when she activated the backup account. It had pulled in all the stored test footage from when she'd briefly mounted it outside her own garage to make sure it worked. Her garage faced the street, and 2 of those test footage days, captured by accident while Dana ran the camera on her driveway before boxing it up, showed a silver sedan parked at the curb across from her house. The same silver sedan, the same wide-shouldered man, standing outside and making a phone call, then looking directly at Dana's house before driving away. I called my sister at 5 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, which told me she hadn't really been asleep either. "Dana," I said, "how long have you known?" There was a pause. Then, known what, exactly? That someone was watching you, or watching me through you. A longer pause. "Come over," she said. "Right now. Pack a bag first." I didn't pack a bag. I just got in my car. Dana made coffee while I sat at her kitchen table and watched the footage again on her laptop, the screen larger now and the details sharper. She stood behind me with her arms folded and her jaw tight, and when the clip ended, she sat down across from me and told me what she'd been piecing together for the past 2 months. She'd started noticing things after a Sunday dinner in which my husband had taken 3 separate calls and stepped outside each time. She'd begun paying attention to the kind of attention that someone who loves you pays when they think something is wrong. She'd looked up his company's registration. She'd found that the consulting firm was real, legally incorporated, a proper website, a listed address in Uptown Charlotte, but that the address was a shared office suite of the kind where you pay a monthly fee for a mailbox and occasional use of a conference room. She'd found 2 reviews online from clients, both posted within the same 2-week window, both using slightly stilted language, both from accounts with no other activity. She hadn't said anything to me because she didn't have anything solid, just a feeling and some soft edges that didn't quite line up. "I didn't want to blow up your marriage on a hunch," she said. "I know," I said, "but I did want you to have the camera." We sat with that for a moment. "What was in the envelope?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. I went home before my husband returned. I made coffee as if nothing had happened and sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open to a work spreadsheet I wasn't reading. He came back at 9:30, kissed the top of my head, poured himself coffee, and asked what I wanted to do for dinner. I said I hadn't thought about it. He said he'd make pasta. He seemed relaxed, lighter than he'd been in months, actually. That frightened me more than anything else. While he showered, I went through his home office quickly and carefully, touching nothing out of place, opening only what I could close again without a trace. I found nothing unusual except a second phone prepaid, minimal contacts tucked inside a hollowed-out book on the bottom shelf. I photographed the contacts list with my own phone before putting it back exactly as I'd found it. 11 numbers, no names, all with area codes from 3 different states. I closed the book. I went back to the kitchen. I started cutting vegetables I didn't need. Over the next 10 days, I moved slowly and said nothing. I still went to work. I still made dinner. I smiled at the right moments and asked about his day, and let him tell me about clients I now understood were probably not real, or at least not what he said they were. At night, I lay next to him in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought carefully about every step. Dana was the one who suggested I talk to a lawyer before I talked to anyone else. I took the day off work and drove to an attorney's office 40 minutes away, far enough that it wouldn't get back to anyone who knew us. The attorney, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, listened to everything I had. The footage, the second phone, the shell company address, the man with the envelope. She asked me 2 questions. First, did I have access to our shared financial accounts? Yes. I had the login information. I hadn't looked closely at the statements in months. Second, was I safe in my home? I said I thought so, that he had never been physically threatening, that the danger, whatever it was, seemed to be pointed outward, at other people, not at me. She nodded. "Then here's what I want you to do," she said. "Go home. Look at every financial statement you can access going back to when you were married. Screenshot everything. Don't move any money and don't let on that you're looking. Then come back to me." I did exactly that. What I found took me the better part of a weekend waiting until he was out of the house, sitting at the kitchen table with both our laptops and 4 years of statements laid out in browser tabs. My husband's consulting business had received regular wire transfers, sometimes 2 or 3 per month, from a rotating set of LLCs with names like Meridian Asset Partners and Crestline Holdings Group. The amounts varied, sometimes $8,000, sometimes $40,000, once $112,000. The money would come in, sit briefly, and then move out again to a second business account I hadn't known existed, and from there presumably somewhere else. I'm not a financial investigator. I didn't know the proper term for what I was looking at, but I knew it didn't look like consulting fees. It looked like layering. It looked like money that needed to be somewhere it hadn't been. When I brought everything to the attorney, she looked at it for a long time. "I want you to do something," she said, "and I want you to think carefully before you decide whether you're willing to do it." She explained that what I had was suggestive but circumstantial. A lawyer could work with it in a divorce proceeding. But if there was something genuinely criminal happening, the people best positioned to follow the money trail were federal investigators, not a family law attorney. "I'm not telling you to go to the FBI," she said. "I'm telling you that's an option. And I'm telling you that if you do, they will want your cooperation. And that cooperation will be complicated, and you need to understand that before you walk through that door." I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I took out my phone and watched the doorbell footage one more time. The man with the envelope, the 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The silver sedan driving away. I called Dana. "What do you think I should do?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that you already know what you need to do. You're just checking to see if I'll talk you out of it." I laughed. Just a little. It was the first time I'd laughed in 2 weeks. "You're not going to talk me out of it," she said. "No," I said. "I'm not." I contacted the FBI field office through their public tip line first, just an initial contact, anonymous, laying out the basics. 2 days later, I had a return call from an agent who asked if I'd be willing to come in and speak with them directly. I said yes. Dana drove me. We sat in a conference room with 2 agents, one who did most of the talking and one who took notes and said almost nothing, and I laid out everything I had. The footage, the phone, the statements, all of it. They asked me not to confront my husband or alert him in any way. They asked me to continue living as normally as I could while they looked into what I'd brought them. They said they couldn't tell me anything about what they found or didn't find or how long it might take. I went home and made pasta. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in March, I was at my desk at the hospital foundation when Dana called me. "Turn on the news," she said. I didn't have a television at my desk. I pulled up the local news site on my laptop. The headline loaded before she could tell me what I was looking for. Federal agents had executed search warrants that morning at 7 Charlotte area addresses, including an uptown shared office suite and a residential address in a suburb south of the city. The warrants were connected to an investigation into wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes across 3 states. 5 individuals had been taken into custody. One of the addresses was mine. I sat very still for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called Dana back. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I think I'm actually okay." My husband was one of the 5 people arrested that Tuesday morning. The full scope of what investigators uncovered, which I learned in pieces over the following months, partly through news coverage and partly through what the prosecutors shared with me as a cooperating witness, was more extensive than I'd understood from the financial statements alone. The LLCs were real companies in the sense that they existed on paper, but they existed specifically to receive and redistribute money from a network of investors who believed they were funding legitimate commercial real estate acquisitions. Those acquisitions were not real. The properties either didn't exist, or existed but were never actually purchased, or were purchased briefly and flipped in transactions that looked clean on the surface but routed profit through the shell companies and back to my husband and at least 3 other individuals who'd been running variations of the same scheme in different markets for years. The man with the envelope was one of them. He was arrested in Ohio. My husband's brother Derek, who I had met at our wedding and seen maybe 6 times since, was also charged. He had been the primary recruiter, the one who found investors through professional and community networks, the one who built the illusion of legitimacy. I hadn't known about Derek. Not really. I'd felt the slight strangeness of their family without being able to name what caused it. I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. About how much we explain away when we love someone. About what we choose not to see. My mother-in-law called me once, from a blocked number. She didn't say she was sorry. She said that I had done what I felt I had to do and that she understood that. She didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. The same tired that I suspected I sounded when I answered. I didn't hear from her again. The divorce was handled by my attorney before the criminal proceedings concluded. Because I had no knowledge of the scheme and had in fact been the one to bring it to investigators' attention, the financial consequences that might otherwise have followed me as a spouse civil forfeiture, victim claims against marital assets were significantly limited. My attorney negotiated carefully and thoroughly, and I came out with the house, which I later sold, and my own savings, which had never been touched by the business accounts. I moved in with Dana for 4 months while I figured out what came next. She had the guest room set up before I'd even asked. She stocked the bathroom with the brand of shampoo I used and put fresh flowers on the nightstand and didn't make a thing of any of it. I'm not going to tell you it was easy. I'm going to tell you it was survivable, which is different. There were nights I lay in Dana's guest room and thought about the way he'd kissed the top of my head that morning after the meeting in the driveway, and felt sick in a way that was equal parts grief and fury. There were days I drove to work and sat in the parking lot because I needed 5 extra minutes before I could put on the version of myself that had it together. There were moments in the grocery store or the pharmacy where I'd see something, a brand of coffee he'd liked, a particular style of jacket, and feel a pain that surprised me every time with how physical it was. But there were also Sunday dinners at Dana's, and her terrible taste in reality television that she watched without apology, and the slow, ordinary process of remembering what my own preferences were when they weren't being quietly shaped by someone else's. There was the afternoon I realized I'd gone a full day without thinking about him. There was the morning I made coffee and stood at the window and noticed that the light coming through was nice, and felt nothing more complicated than that. My attorney told me once, early in the process, that the hardest part for many people isn't the discovery. It's the period after the rewiring of all the small assumptions you didn't even know you were making. Who you were in relation to someone, who you are now, when that relation no longer exists. She was right. That part was the hardest, and it took longer than I expected. But Dana was patient, and I was stubborn, and the doorbell camera still worked, sending its small, reliable chime to my phone whenever someone came up the walk. I checked it one morning, months after everything, and it was just the mail carrier leaving a package. I set down my phone and drank my coffee and thought about how the whole thing had started with a notification I'd almost ignored. I don't know what my life would look like if I'd rolled over and gone back to sleep that morning. I've thought about it. I've decided it's not a useful thing to dwell on. What I know is this: the truth doesn't always come looking for you. Sometimes you have to be awake at the right moment, and brave enough to look at what you find, and stubborn enough to do something about it. And sometimes your sister installs a camera over your front door and links it to a backup account without telling you, because she loves you and she's paying attention even when you're not, and that turns out to be the thing that changes everything. I called Dana the morning I moved into my new apartment. It was small and bright and smelled like fresh paint and had nothing in it except a mattress on the floor and a box of kitchen things she'd helped me pack. She asked how it felt. I looked around at all the empty space. Like mine, I said. She laughed. And I laughed. And it didn't have that careful quality anymore, the kind of laugh that's also a signal that you're okay, you're holding it together, you're fine. It was just a laugh. Do you need anything? She said. I can come over. I was going to bring food anyway. Yes, I said. Come over. Bring food. She did. We sat on the floor of my empty living room and ate Thai food out of the containers because I didn't have any plates yet. She told me about something ridiculous that had happened at her job. I told her about the neighbor I'd met in the hallway who'd immediately started telling me the entire history of the building in great detail. We stayed until it was late. When she finally left and I locked the door behind her, I stood in the quiet for a moment. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car outside, the small sounds of a place that was going to become familiar. I took out my phone and opened the camera app one more time. My new doorbell camera, the first thing I'd set up, before the mattress, before anything showed the empty hallway outside my door. Still, safe, mine. I went to bed and I slept well,